to do that.
And live now here on C-SPAN, we head to Queens, New York, where Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is hosting a town hall meeting on her plan to fight poverty and help with access to federal benefits. This started just a few minutes ago, opening remarks underway.
And Mabel will be keeping us on check. And then I also want to recognize one mic, one voice. We all want to listen to the person that's speaking. So again, we want to create a respectable environment so we can have this discussion. And the last item is you received a Q&A clip. So if you have a slip, if you have any questions, my colleagues Noreen and Marcus will be going around collecting them. You can raise them and we'll go around again collecting them so that at the end I'll be emceeing, so I'll pass the mic over to you and you'll be able to ask your question. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce the representative of New York 14, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
All right, awesome, thank you. Thank you so much, hello again. So as Michelle noted, one of the major updates that we have this month is that we introduced our next major sweeping suite of legislation known as the Just Society. And one of the things that we really wanted to talk about, it's a package of about 5 bills and 1 resolution that attack some of the central core issues of poverty. And we're talking about not just we're talking about how we measure poverty, we're talking about housing, we're talking about who we allow to be eligible for our social safety nets in America. We're talking about pro-worker policy that protects working conditions and promotes pro-worker policies like paid family leave, living wages, etc. And it also compels us to join the global community in an elevated commitment to working people. So before I get into that very briefly, I just want to address kind of the news elephant in the room. One of the other things that happened is the House of Representatives has decided to move forward with impeachment of the President of the United States. And this was a major development. Some folks are saying finally. I certainly feel that way. I don't want to spend an enormous amount of time talking about impeachment, but if you have questions, I'm happy to talk to you about it. Basically, long story short, the President of the United States used the power of the United States government to attempt to extort a foreign government into creating a false or drumming up a manufactured investigation into a political opponent. This is a violation of the Constitution of the United States. It is an abuse of power. It is a betrayal of our country. And anyone who does something like that, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you abuse power and betray our country in such a manner, you must be impeached in order for us to protect our rule of law in our country. Thank you. And, pretty open and shut. And, again, if you have questions, please reserve them for the end. But I feel like it's a pretty open and closed situation. As many of you know, I have advocated for impeachment for quite some time. This abuse of power has been going on for quite some time. And I think for our community, there are a lot of folks that are saying this is not a joyous moment, this is not a moment to celebrate, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that this is a cathartic moment for many people in our community that have been the subject to the abuse of this administration for quite some time, especially our community, New York 14. It's about 50% immigrants, 70% people of color, overwhelmingly working class, and we've had to endure a lot in the last 2 years. And so I'm not here to police your reaction to it because we all need to go through our process. So feel what you need to feel, but that's what's going on. Again, I'm gonna move on because frankly, I think the whole thing's boring. He should have been impeached a long time ago. Like, I'm over it. And so that's how I feel about it because we've got work to do. Because the impeachment of this president is the short-term action that we need to take to preserve our democracy. But if we are really going to thrive as a country, we need to make long-term investments and keep our eyes on the prize of social, economic, and racial justice in the United States of America. And that's really what this is about. So let's dive in. So very quickly, do I have the clicker? Do I use the clicker? Okay, so Dan, if you don't mind. What we're gonna do, so basically what the Just Society is, as I said, it's about 5 bills and 1 resolution that is really focused on anti-poverty legislation, and it's focusing on establishing economic and racial justice, some of the core issues. So I'll go through it pretty quickly, but it's basically, the first is the Recognized Poverty Act, which seeks to update the federal poverty line. Our current poverty line is pegged to 1955 spending patterns. So what does that mean? Anytime, like, your qualification for everything is based on a measure that assumes 1 income earner in a home, 1 stay-at-home mother. It doesn't include the cost of childcare, health care, or a ton of other things, or geographic cost of living. It pegged to, you know, really what the actual cost of living is in 2019. So this fixes that. This directs the federal government to establish a new poverty line, which we'll talk about more. The second is a Place to Prosper Act, which is a sweeping set of housing reforms to the entire country, which includes a national cap on raising housing prices, as well as some punishments for abusive landlords in the United States. The third is known as the Embrace Act, and we also have the Mercy and Reentry Act and the Embrace Act. So I'll start with Mercy and Reentry Act. The Mercy and Reentry Act allows us to open all of our social safety nets, and it ends federal discrimination on our social programs based on people who were formerly incarcerated. And one reason that we do that is because one of the #1 reasons for recidivism, why mass incarceration is such a persistent problem, is poverty. It's because people come out, we refuse and we deny and we refuse to extend opportunities to folks, so then we create so much economic isolation in this country that people feel funneled right back into recidivism, and then we're incarcerating the same community over and over again. So the Mercy and Reentry Act ends federal discrimination for the formerly incarcerated for our social safety net, and the Embrace Act, we are doing the same, and we are ending, and it's a piece of legislation that ends similar discrimination based on documentation status. It's a kind of a next level piece of legislation, and it is something that people are gonna say, why would you do that? I believe that we need to acknowledge the contributions that immigrants make in America. And if you contribute to our society, I believe that you should benefit from our society. And then the last is the Uplift Our Workers Act, which which directs the federal government to create a score, to score federal contractors on how good they are to their workers, from predictable schedules to union participation to worker cooperatives to paid family leave. And then it directs the federal government to spend their money with companies that are good to their workers. And then last, directs the United States to finally ratify the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. We'll dig into what that means more later. So we can move on to our next slide real quick. And we're just gonna play this very quickly. It goes a little bit more into depth into what the suite of legislation is, so we can all get kind of, we can all kind of dig into it a little bit more. Oh, we ran into some technical difficulties. Oh, okay, never mind. Is it working or not? Is it not hooked up to the speakers? That's fine, we can close it out. Yeah, we can close it out. This video is saying all the things that I just said, so don't worry about it. It was gonna go into a little bit more detail, but I'll just do it because we have some follow-ups as well. But as I said, it's 5 bills and 1 resolution, and all of these are tackling some of the core underlying issues of poverty in America today. This is just a beginning. It's not by any means the decisive end product. There's a lot more that we need to go, but I'll go one by one. So the first thing that we talk about is that a just society recognizes and eradicates poverty. So as I said, this requires us to update the federal poverty line. So we can go to the next one. And so what this does is that our first legislation requires us to update the federal poverty line, including these things. The geographic cost variation. So we will actually recognize that living in New York City is much more expensive than living in other parts of the country. And we can adapt our federal poverty line to adjust for that. The second is the cost of healthcare is not covered in our federal poverty line. So they assume that your healthcare costs don't exist. The third is work expenses related to family, AKA childcare, is a huge one. Like I said, childcare needs, and it also includes new necessities. So in our federal poverty line, we believe that internet access is a new necessity in order for us to access opportunities. So we are including the cost of new necessities in the federal poverty line. The next is the Place to Prosper Act, which is the housing legislation that we were talking about. We can go, next. So the Place to Prosper Act, has anyone heard of the sweeping housing legislation that we passed in the state this year, the statewide ones? So kudos to all of our organizers. A lot of the inspiration from this is pursuing the state laws that we're picking them up, and we're trying to apply some of those lessons to the federal level, which is how I believe a lot of our legislation should work, from the bottom up. And so what this does is that they include provisions to protect tenants, because for a lot of our laws, we aren't focusing on tenants. We're focusing on mortgages, which is great. We need to protect working and middle-class families, but I don't believe we have enough protections for tenants federally. So it protects tenants. We want to improve the quality of our housing stock. We want to rein in corporate landlords, and we want to ensure that housing is available and affordable to all. One of those provisions says that if you are a landlord and cover a lot of housing stock, and you are documented for abusing your, and you are having, and you have a track record of abusing your tenants, then you can't get a mortgage to build more development until you get your act together. So that's a huge part of our provisions. The last, what we're talking about, the Embrace Act, as I said before, it ends federal discrimination of our social benefits based on documentation status. People say, well, why should we do that? This is very controversial, et cetera. Immigrants pay taxes. All immigrants pay taxes. Whether you're documented or undocumented, immigrants pay for our public schools. They help contribute to our society, just like anybody else. And if a billionaire can get away with not paying their taxes and reaping from public systems, then I think undocumented people should be recognized for their contributions to society as well. So we can go on next. As I said, we say a just society is merciful, and that's where the Mercy and Reentry Act comes into play. So what the Mercy and Reentry Act does is, so often someone becomes incarcerated, a lot of times for unjust reasons, as we've seen with the war on drugs, right? Where people get incarcerated for 10, 15 years for selling something that people are now making millions of dollars selling in California, Colorado, et cetera. And so once you get out, there are a lot of federal programs, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, where you get caught up in a system and you are either outright denied or discriminated against because you already paid your debt to society years ago. And what this does is that it contributes to this pipeline of incarceration and going in and out of this system. Because when you create a state of economic desperation, that is exactly the kind of environment where you begin to spread our system of mass incarceration. So this does the same exact thing, where it says you cannot be discriminated against because you paid your debt to society some time ago. you fulfilled that obligation, we should extend our social safety net to you as well. This one, the Uplifts Our Workers Act, also, as I said, it creates kind of like a lead score for all federal contractors. An enormous amount of our budget and our federal spending goes to contractors, where the government pays a private contractor to fulfill some kind of need. And so I believe that the federal government is going to inject a lot of money into our economy. That money should be going into workers' pockets, and it should be going to helping establish a just economy for everybody. So what this does is that it creates a worker-friendly score for federal contractors, and it says, we are gonna put you at the front of the line for contracts if you offer paid family leave, if you pay a living wage to people, if you have a unionized workforce, if you are a worker cooperative, and so on. And the last one says, a just society guarantees economic, social, and cultural rights for all. About, I don't know, say in the 1970s, the UN put forth the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. 170 international parties have ratified the covenant. The United States has not. We need to do this. And one of the reasons, one of the hunches that I have as to why we have not ratified this is because it essentially codifies 21st century rights. The right to a dignified and safe workplace, the right to an education, the right to health care, and obviously we don't fulfill or satisfy all of those rights in the United States. But I think it's about time that we do, because that's what advanced societies do. And so if we want to continue to say that the United States is a leader in the world, then we need to be a leader in the human condition. We need to be a leader in human rights. We need to be a leader in equality and equity. And we need to be a leader in really creating a robust economic and socially just society. So as I said, these are all the countries that have signed, well, many of these are countries that have signed onto it, but the United States has not. And that's it in terms of that. Now, given all of that, we just want to open the floor for questions on this legislation. So what we want to do is just frontline any questions on this, but we will also open the floor to other questions that you have. And feel free to take it away. I think, Noreen, are you? Okay, so Michelle's got some questions. If you have any more, write them down on that slip and we'll hand them over to you.
Great. Wonderful. So, Abdul Innis?
Right here.
Okay, you have the first question. And then Terry Graham. Oh, and I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Councilmember Jimmy Van Bramer, who's here in the back. Thank you for joining us tonight. Terry Graham? Okay.
Go ahead, you can ask your question.
Oh. How you doing, Ms. Cortez?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah. Last time we met, I think we was in the Bronx. I asked a question and you gave a great answer.
Oh, thanks.
I kind of just want to ask it again because this time we're on camera.
Oh,
Sure.
sure.
If that's all right. All right. Well, my question is concerning about the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has been reaching out to LGBT concerns and immigration concerns, as they should. Mm-hmm. But in recent years, there's one group that has been kind of like left out, is our African Americans. African Americans, to some degree, probably feel betrayed or used by the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. So when Donald Trump said, "What do you have to lose?" You know, a lot of them, of course, didn't vote for Trump, but they decided to stay home and said, maybe we have a point. So my question is, how can you, your squad friends, and people like me reach out to African Americans, especially to sell your Just Society, which has been greatly explained?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's an excellent question. Thank you, Abdul.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, give him a round of applause. First of all, I say that I empathize a lot with that sentiment. I understand why people say that. I experience it a lot when I'm in DC too. It feels sometimes like our votes and our support are taken for granted precisely because how reliably democratic our communities are. And I see it representing a district that is a safe blue district. People say, well, you're gonna vote for us anyway, like we don't need to worry about you, like we don't need to concern you. And so, and as a result, a lot of times our concerns and our pursuit for justice, take a seat, take it. A lot of times our concerns are almost placed to the last of the line because we're not a swing seat, right? And everyone's like, we gotta worry about the swing seats, we need to worry about the swing seats. And so criminal justice, we kick the can on that. We kick the can on immigration justice, which is also, it's not an African-American issue, but it is a black issue as well when we talk about our Haitian, African immigrants, et cetera. We kick the can on issues of economic justice, of voting reform, et cetera. All of a sudden, it's controversial to talk about these things. And so I understand, and I empathize with that too, because people are saying, we vote for the Democratic Party, why doesn't the Democratic Party vote for us? Like, why don't we center our concerns? And that is why I get into trouble. That is why people say, like when people say, oh, she's a lightning rod on the left and she's a lightning rod on the right, one of the reasons why we are quote unquote controversial within the party is because we'll say, why do we have to wait for these things over and over and over again? Like James Baldwin, he has this, really epic clip where he's in an interview and he's like, my parents and my family were born waiting for our rights and they have died waiting for our rights. I feel and so how long do you want me to wait? And that is a very core part of the questions that we're dealing with today, and I empathize as well. My family's from Puerto Rico. My grandfather was born without the ability to vote in federal elections, and he died in the direct aftermath of Hurricane Maria without the ability to vote in federal elections. And so we will not wait. And like my friend Ayanna Pressley says, change cannot wait. We are at a breaking point in American society with inequality in income, with inequality in racial justice, with inequality in our outcomes. We are literally at the point where people are at the brink of eviction, where people are dying because they can't afford their insulin, because they have family that are caught up in a system of mass incarceration. We cannot wait to fix these problems anymore. And so what I think the Democratic Party can do is that we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? Like, we can worry about swing district concerns, and we can also center the concerns of the Black community, of all sorts of communities that are deemed controversial to tend to. Because equal and equitable outcomes should not be controversial in the United States of America, and they certainly shouldn't be in the Democratic Party. You want me to
Okay, I recently received a newsletter from your office that outlined your priorities, which included appropriation amendments for an additional $20 million for opioid treatment, and that was great, but I haven't seen anything so far about Alzheimer's and related dementias, and this is becoming a public health crisis. The people living with this disease is set to triple, and soon there will only be people who know people who have Alzheimer's or have had it themselves, because someone is getting it every 65 seconds. By the middle of the century, the cost is going to project it to be $1 trillion, with 2/3 of that paid by Medicare and Medicaid. And I know that most people don't think about it until they're personally affected, because I wasn't until my mother was diagnosed back in 2013. But she was a New York City employee, so she had really good health care. However, the cost of putting her in assisted facility was exorbitant. And if the money hadn't been saved by my father, there would have been no way for me to take care of her. So we have some pending legislation right now. And right now I'm hoping as an advocate for the Alzheimer's Association that you could sign on. I did speak to your DC policy advisor a couple of months ago about it. And right now it has bipartisan support. So can we just know that you're going to pay more attention to Alzheimer's and the way that it's affecting people, because it has a disproportionate impact on women and people of color,
Absolutely.
both as caregivers and as the people who are afflicted.
Thank you. Yes. No, thank you so much. And thank you for your advocacy too, because there are so many issues we have to tend to, and so often the way that we decide which ones to do in a given day is directly because someone in our community stood up and actually made the request just like you did right now. So I can tell you absolutely, we'll definitely take a look at whichever legislation you are bringing up. And I also want to take this moment to say, like, this is why Medicare for All is so important. Because not everyone is lucky enough to work for an employer that guarantees them health care. And even if you do work for an employer that gives you health care, year after year, that care is getting more expensive and the coverage is getting worse. And so this is why I'm such a huge proponent of Medicare for All, of which the latest provisions, bless you, of which the latest provisions now include provisions for long-term care. And I can't even understate how important this shift is, because first of all, this is a big reason why I think there's a difference between a public option and Medicare for All. Because if we establish a public option, for-profit insurers are going to offset their most expensive customers into the public option, and it's going to create it sets it up for a financial crisis. With a Medicare for All system, it helps us address this issue. You know, you're talking about the exploding rates of Alzheimer's. I believe that this is also very tied to demographic shifts in our country. You know, we have a baby boomer generation, we have a millennial generation, and I believe that if millennials and Gen Z, our job is to buy into Medicare so that we can keep it solvent and take care of our parents and grandparents. And so Medicare for All is a huge issue, and I think it's a huge puzzle piece, but also we need to do the research, and we need to make sure that we're continuing to have special accommodations for members of our community, especially those with Alzheimer's. So absolutely. And Ariel right here, if you can raise your hand. Ariel's my chief of staff, and she's also been working as my legislative director up to this point. So if you have any specific legislative concerns, you can always bring them to her at the end. So thank you.
Alexander Bernie Siegler. There we go. And
What a name.
Binwal Shah. Binwal Shah. Not present. Okay. Well,
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. My question for you is, given that climate change is a pressing issue that must be addressed, would you approve the construction of new generation nuclear power plants?
Well, that's an excellent question. So I get asked about nuclear a lot. One of the things that we talk about in the Green New Deal is that we certainly leave space for nuclear in that energy mix to that transition. For all of us, it's always about the logistics of that transition and what that mix looks like. You know, and it also has to come to the specific proposals, right? Like, where are we putting this? What are the environmental concerns with it? But also, what are the subsidies involved? And so we allow that to be a conversation in the community. We don't take a hard stance, yes or no. It's about the specific solution. And, you know, folks have also brought up that nuclear technology has changed a lot. So I think that's certainly something to consider and have in the conversation. And then, you know, and this is an ongoing debate. You know, there are a lot of environmental concerns. As sea levels rise, we have nuclear facilities now that I'm frankly very concerned about, like Indian Point, that should have been shut down a long time ago. And as sea levels rise, it's going to threaten the structural integrity of that facility. We're gonna have to figure out what to do with that nuclear waste. But that being said, I think it's a conversation that we have. You know, I am not an energy scientist, and I'm not going to act like one. we know the science of climate change. And we know that we need to get to 100% clean and renewable energy as quickly as possible. So I think there's a whole set of conversations to be had there. But for now, right now, we just need to we can't even, like, this Congress just finds a resolution saying we need to fix the problem to be controversial. So we're trying to take everyone along one step at a time, and once we get to that place, we'll have that conversation.
Charles Clark and Michael Koch. Okay. And then Charles here. Michael, right? Or you're Charles? Oh, okay.
Okay. Hi, Alexandria.
Hey.
Okay. And I live in Astoria. I have a lot. My question's pretty multifaceted. I have epilepsy, and I currently face 3 surgeries, including orthopedic surgery, which includes 4 months of recovery, including 4 to 6 weeks in a sling. That means I categorically cannot work jobs that include a lot of heavy lifting. But even more to the point, I seem to be doing all the right things, and no one's willing to take a chance on me. I believe that's because a lot of the recruiters and hiring managers are pretty rigid and still have this mentality where they want the perfect quote-unquote candidate and not someone they can be flexible with. And I know that a federal jobs guarantee is part of the Green New Deal and presumably a just society. And it's something I support and something Bernie has also honed in on. And aside from tuition-free college, do you believe that we should actually be paid to go to college and not the other way around? And then duly earn the academic credentials we get in order to advance in our careers. And if something could be done, if any public or private higher education official in the world hears this, where they will actually pay me to go to their classes either online or on campus, then I can't thank you enough. But also, this is the next part, the cost of housing is ridiculous. But even when I'm offered a place, as I was recently, for example, I got offered a studio for $853 a month, but they turned me down because I wasn't actually on the lease, you know? I mean, only as an occupant, but I wasn't, you know, like the leaseholder. My dad was. But I applied to it 2 years before as it was above my old job. But what do you suggest that I make for the best out of my current situation?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. You covered a lot of ground there. But I think it's important to acknowledge, like, this is why we propose all of these policies at once. You know, it's not because I'm radical on education and I'm radical on criminal justice reform and I'm radical on healthcare. It's because we recognize that all of these situations are linked. And if you go this far in one area, but then you half step in another area, you're not actually improving a person's life. You can perpetuate a lot of problems. So I'll start with what I remember your order to be, but let me know if I skipped anything. The first is the idea of a federal jobs guarantee. I believe that this is a really exciting area of policy, because what a federal jobs guarantee does is that it acts as a shock absorber for our economy. So what it means is that there are a lot of jobs that pose a value to society that come at a loss for companies. So for example, keeping our communities clean. How is that a profitable activity for a corporation? It's not, but it is a valuable activity for our community. There's a whole lot of other examples of work like this, and what a federal jobs guarantee proposes is creating a class of employment that allows people, that has a guaranteed minimum. It's essentially like a public option for jobs that guarantees a living wage, health care, and more. And then it forces companies to compete to offer at least that much and it establishes a base quality of work. And then what happens is that when the economy does poorly and people are out of a job, then a federal jobs guarantee expands, and then as the economy improves, the amount of people on a federal jobs guarantee lowers. And so it acts as a shock absorber for our economy, and I think it's a really fascinating proposal so that we don't just have to rely on social welfare programs. It adds to the mix of ways that we improve people's lives while also investing in their skills and so on. So I think it's a great proposal, and it's been proposed by several economists, et cetera. And I think it's something that we deserve to explore. The second about tuition-free public colleges, universities, and should we pay people for going to college? Yeah. One thing that I did yesterday was that I actually toured the Percy job training and apprenticeship programs, and our apprenticeship programs do pay people to learn.
Historically have, but I think apprenticeships need to be, I'm sorry, so I just think that apprenticeships need to be added to way more fields than they historically have been.
Yes.
Like just in the skilled trades, for example.
Yes, and that's actually something that was brought up. So our job apprenticeship and training centers in Throgsneck by Maritime College on the Bronx half of the district. And that's one of the things that they talk about, is that right now we offer apprenticeships in carpentry, welding, other building trades, but even the folks in the school offering apprenticeships, we're saying that this is really the future of how we create work in America, that we need to have apprenticeships for childcare, for teaching, for writing, et cetera. And that's one way that people can transition into our economy without having to go 4 years without an income, which a lot of people can't afford when it comes to going to college. And once again, the federal jobs guarantee, one of the things that they do is that they specifically, some of the policy proposals around the federal jobs guarantee specifically accommodates not just to people with disabilities, but all people who need a flexible schedule, working parents, et cetera. So I think that we're investigating a lot of the solutions to what you're talking about. Your current situation is a perfect example of why we need to make these jumps in our economy. Thank you.
There's a lot of problems that still need to be resolved, but I think we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, if you want to open a case, you can always open a case with Mabel or Maribel, and we can investigate any federal programs for you.
No problem.
Of course, thank you. Anyone else? Oh, hey.
Hi. Susan? Oh.
Yeah.
Hi, Alexandria. My name is Michael Coach. I just was very involved in local politics lately, and now I'm making the shift to federal. And my question is sort of a sci-fi one, and a combination of the two. I noticed in the Green New Deal, sorry, I have to, that you have ideas for projects for climate change. And I see monorails in all of the posters. And I'm very interested in that technology because I go to Tokyo a couple of times a year, and I see them in action. And Tokyo is a very similar city to New York in terms of the coverage. And one of the ideas I was thinking about was we have a lot of trouble with the MTA in our trains. And climate change is going to affect that in the sense it's going to flood the tunnels eventually, like it did at Hurricane Sandy. And we have a lot of debris falling from the MTA stations. And it'll cost $350 million to replace. So what I'm asking is, okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Mine's high concept.
Oh, wow.
I did a sketch of the Circle Line, of the Yamanote Line in Japan, applying it to Queens. And I'm involved with trying to stop Sunnyside Yards. But I think we could apply that to transportation, maybe use the idea of the Green New Deal to have a Circle Line around Queens using monorails. And it's much cheaper than the MTA.
Thank you.
And
No,
I just wanted to propose it and see what you think.
no, thank you. Thank you so much. And I find this very inspiring because this was the whole point of us creating a Green New Deal resolution, is to elicit and to challenge us to think about what we can do as a society with public funds and public infrastructure. One of the biggest problems that we have is that we don't even realize how much money we are spending because it's all going to corporations, the military, and the very rich. And so the idea of us having tuition-free public colleges feels impossible because we are not used to government working for us in these ways. But the government can work for us in the same, if the government worked for us half as much as it works for billionaires and corporations, our lives would be transformed in a very fundamental way. And projects like these are exactly what the Green New Deal is asking us to imagine and to envision, because it always blows my mind how we lived, and our country lived through a time where we said, you know what? We are going to create an entire subterranean subway system in the biggest metropolis in the country. We are going to build an entire fleet, or rather an entire system of public schools. We are going to pursue projects that we have never pursued before. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to electrify the country. We're going to fight for civil rights. And at some point, we stopped being that country. At some point, we started to say, it's too hard, even though we all had already done it. And so when it comes, for example, to the MTA, I believe it's being treated as though it's already a lost cause. And I don't believe in that. I don't believe that anything is ever too broken to fix. And I don't believe that this country's too broken to fix. But someone would look at this and say, you're crazy. But you're not crazy. You're not crazy for thinking that we can be better, and that, you know, for so long we have talked about this notion of American exceptionalism, that we are the best. And this idea caused us to make investments that in many places, many areas made us the best. In other areas, we were not the best. But in some areas, in research, in technology, in infrastructure, we were the best. But we can't rest on our laurels, because at this point, we were, when you compare us to Japan, when you compare us to the transportation systems in Japan, when you compare us to the healthcare systems in Norway and in the Netherlands and in Canada, we are increasingly saying we were once the best. And I don't want to be that country. And so when it comes to the Green New Deal, people are like, and of course, they come from this zero-sum mentality. We're going to take away your hamburgers. We're going to take away your airplanes. We're going to take away all of these things. And really, what this is asking us is, what are we going to make? Not what are we going to take away? What are we going to establish? And frankly, for everyone that says a Green New Deal is going to ground planes, I guarantee you climate change, which threatens storms, turbulence, airplane groundings, and airport closures, will ground airplanes far sooner and far worse than any sort of climate legislation ever would if we made, for example, scientific investments in zero carbon airplanes and flights and things like that, which I believe at some point, you know, hopefully we'll be able to create that kind of technology, but it takes thinking like this to do it. So thank you.
Paul Ilianson and Michael Zulo. Are you Paul? Okay.
Hi, Ms. Cortez. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm here because I'm a 9/11 first responder. I have 4 different illnesses from 9/11. I get a little emotional when I talk about it because I have PTSD.
Can you hold your microphone?
I have PTSD from 9/11. It's been established. I'm here because Mr. Crowley started a 9/11 Immigrant Freedom Workers Act, which is H.R. 3250. And it seemed like it's going to die in Congress, and nobody has picked it back up. And since you have taken over from him, I would like to know if you will continue that. Also, I'm a Haitian immigrant, and I work for Law and Order SVU television show. I've paid over $3 million in taxes, and I've been in this country for 51 years, and I face deportation.
Oh my God.
First of all, I'd like all of us to really acknowledge the contributions that Paul, you said your name was Paul? That Mr. Eliason? That Mr. Eliason has made to our country and to our city. This is him on 9/11. This is great. He's showing me a photo of him at Ground Zero. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your service. And there are so many aspects to your story that touch my core, and it is like why I do what I am doing. Because when I hear the rhetoric of this president, and when I hear the rhetoric of so many people talking about immigrants and undocumented people as though they are disposable and unworthy, I think of people like you and how wrong that is. How wrong it is for them to do that, because you're right, you said you've been here 51 years? 1968. So the fact that you've been here 51 years and have not been extended a path to citizenship means that we were wrong, not you were wrong.
I don't want to
Yeah, of course.
mislead you. I came here legally
Mm-hmm.
with my brothers and sisters, mother. However, I got into some trouble. I was here,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what caused the possible
Well,
deportation.
you know what? To me, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to me, because you have clearly given everything of yourself to our country, body and soul. This year, one of the bright spots that we've had this year is that we did pass the 9/11 victims fund, and we finally got that through. But there is much more work to do. So if my predecessor had picked up a piece of legislation that you see we're dropping the ball on, I can give you my word today that we will pick it up. And I'm happy to take a look at that. But when people talk about immigrants in this country, we need to tell your story. Because I am tired of people acting as though we are a merciless nation that is willing to throw people away because you make less than a certain amount of money, because you lack a certain piece of paper. I believe in human dignity. I don't care what your status is. I don't care what your past is. The only way that we improve as a society is by giving people the opportunity to give. And we need to take care of each other. And we need to have a commitment to take care of you. We also do a lot of work on case-by-case immigration cases. So while we can work on passing this legislation, I want you to connect with Marcus or Michelle or Maribel so that we can take up your case personally. We have kept families together. And I want to let some people know that if you know anybody, if you are in this room, or if you know anybody that is carrying this burden, to let them know that our office is here to help you. We just yesterday, I met with a constituent who's been here for 29 years. And he's been going regularly and faithfully to his ICE check-ins. He has no problem, no history, nothing. He walked in and ICE detained him and put him into a detention center for deportation. He has 3 children, ranging from 11 years old up to his eldest, I imagine, is in his 20s. His wife was here, and that experience alone is traumatizing. That low grade, it's like if you've ever lived without health insurance and you walk out the door every morning and you're like, I hope nothing happens to me today. There's so many people that walk out their front door in the morning thinking that, whether it's because you have an issue with your documentation and you walk out the door and you say, I hope nothing happens to me with our immigration system, or you're uninsured and you walk out the door and you say, I hope nothing happens to me that makes me need to go to a hospital today, or you walk out the door and you say, you know, I hope that I don't get fired from my job because of XYZ reason, or because I'm not educated enough and I can't afford to go to college. When we have that level of anxiety, and there's a lot of it only creates chaos. And it doesn't help us feel safe or secure. But yesterday, we were able to celebrate the fact that we reunited a family. So our constituent was arrested, taken into ICE. He was brought to the airport, and we were able to get him out, working with our community partners. We've been able to get constituents on a case-by-case basis their work authorizations. We've been able to work with pro bono lawyers in our community that are finding, wait a second, like if you dig up some details of the case, it changes the outcome of the case. So if you can, I ask you to open a case with our office and we'll see what we can do for you, and we'll do everything that we can for you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Hi.
Hi there.
I know I only have 2 minutes, but before I get to my question, I just want to thank you for the A Place to Prosper Act, where you got to rein in corporate landlords. And I hope sometime soon down the road, I read in the New York Times headline that Kushner was the first that they got.
Yep, that's right. Amen.
Anyway, my question, well, I know my question, I'll have to read it. In the beginning, you were in the forefront with other House members for the impeachment of Trump. Mm-hmm. And I read, and I don't tune into Fox News, mm-hmm. I read that there were some grievances between you and a few others with the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. Mm-hmm. So now is a very serious and important time, because we got to get this madman Trump impeached. And I think if there are any grievances or discrepancies that you may have, I'm sorry, I got to speak, okay, that you may have with Speaker Pelosi, I think they should be kept behind closed doors and don't let Fox News have access to that, because they create a division.
Of course.
And we don't need that at this time. We need the Democrats united so we can get this guy out of office.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, it was a rhetorical question.
Oh, no,
can you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you for that. I think the way that we always talk about it too is, as we talk about it in what they call the Democratic Caucus. The Democratic Caucus is basically all of the Democrats in the House of Representatives. We literally get together in a room much like this one once a week, and we have our outs like a family. We close the door, don't let anybody in. And that's how we talk about it. Like a family, we're gonna disagree with each other. We're gonna get into our tiffs. We're gonna have our disagreements and how we want to do things. But we do not want to fundamentally disagree on our goals, on our outcomes. We all want to move towards justice. We all want to move towards economic prosperity. We all want to center working families. And we all want to root out the deep rot of corruption in this administration, frankly. And so I can tell you that while I am proud to have the independence of my seat, I am not funded by corporations. I'm funded by grassroots. I'm directly accountable to that community, so that means that I will be speaking truth to power within the party from time to time. I can assure you that in this moment, there is nothing that is going to shake the unity of the Democratic Party in impeaching the President of the United States. Of course. Thank you. And that's what they're scared of, by the way. Because Fox will make up beef to act like there is beef. And I assure you on this, there ain't there. Where's the beef? It's right. You all got it.
Shirley from AIDS Center of Queens County. And there was a constituent who wrote a note on this sheet of paper. Okay, and so let's. Okay.
You got it.
And Shirley, I did. Okay, here we go.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be in your presence and your team.
No, I'm honored
and
you're
with
here.
everyone here. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Shirley Bejarano from the 8th Center of Queens County. So my question is regarding, of course, the HIV/AIDS efforts. And so given the current administration's plan to tackle HIV/AIDS, how do you see the distribution of funds affecting our community here in New York, Queens? Because we need to work together with the different sectors. This is not a biological disease. This is a social disease. And so how will, or are you or will your team help us to support ending the epidemic?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking this question. This is another area where we actually had a fairly high bright spot this year. It was actually in the area of HIV/AIDS treatment, prevention, etc. You are completely right that HIV/AIDS is not just a biological disease. It is a social disease, and it intersects with so many different issues. One area where I can give you an immediate win that we've had this year is that I sit on the Oversight Committee of Congress, and we brought in the CEO of this pharmaceutical company called Gilead. And what we found out was that Gilead was charging $2,000 a month in the United States for PrEP, for medication that helped people prevent the transmission of HIV/AIDS. So if you're charging someone or even a city $2,000 a month to keep someone from spreading a disease, if they can't afford that, where does that leave the rest of us? And so we brought them in, and here's what we found, is that they were charging over $2,000 a month for PrEP. But who paid to develop PrEP? We found out the public did. That through the CDC funded, or rather, the CDC or the NIH funded critical research that identified the beginnings of what became PrEP. And Gilead simply picked it up and started selling it for $2,000 a month. Our own, what we paid for. And this doesn't just happen with PrEP, it happens with a lot of other medications. And so not only did we find that Gilead did this, not only did we find that the public is actually entitled to, if not a royalty, is actually entitled to the patent for PrEP. But we brought him in, and I asked him, this is funny. You're charging $2,000 a month in the United States. In Australia, you're charging $6 to $8. And so sometimes we have multiple tools as legislators, and the bully pulpit is one of them, because they do not like to be exposed. And so sometimes we pass laws to force things to happen, but sometimes we can use the bully pulpit to expose what's happening to the public, and they will change their behavior. So what they found is that Gilead is going to, after that hearing, Gilead announced, or right before or after that hearing, right before, I don't know, we were making the hearing, they knew this was coming. And they announced that they are going to make PrEP generic a year earlier than they were anticipating, which is next year, or after our hearing. So after our hearing, they announced that they're going to send PrEP generic. So we have a win on PrEP, but there's still so much to go, from research to public policy that is backed by public health research, because HIV is also, like you said, it's a social disease. So when we talk about HIV, we also need to talk about our homelessness crisis. When we talk about HIV, we need to talk about drug opioid addiction. When we talk about HIV, we need to talk about the social stigmas that are put against the LGBT community, and also anyone that contracts HIV. So we have a lot of work to do, and this president mentioned goals around HIV. So long as his goals are constructive, like, I'll pitch in. I'm not gonna not work with him just because of his name. I will double check his work. But I'm not strictly partisan in that way. But I do think that HIV is a disease that can be ended in a generation, precisely because it is a social disease. And we need to work on those social conditions, and those social conditions are a direct result of public policy. Of course, thank you.
Thank you very much. Alexandria, on C-SPAN 1, 2, and 3, you're my favorite superstar.
Oh, thank you.
I'm from the Bronx.
Yay, what neighborhood?
From Norwood. From
Okay.
Norwood originally, 30,
Okay,
50. And I don't know if I would do what you would do without at least a rehearsal.
Oh, thank you.
So in all honesty, again, if I may, I'm just asking about HR 4088. Just quickly, it allows for the direct access of funds from oil and chemical taxes rather than relying on Congress to appropriate funding from the general revenue. There are already 6 co-sponsors. Perhaps you know them. Jerry Connolly of Virginia, Jerry McInerney from California, Terry Sewell from Alabama, Raul, I believe his name is Grijalva from Arizona, yes. Matt Cartwright from Pennsylvania, and the wonderful, I met her once, Eleanor Holmes Norton from...
She's great.
Isn't she?
She's fabulous.
And this, I'm not sure the term, but this just faded out in 95.
Okay.
And to me, again, within my 2 minutes, somebody who dumps on your front lawn and leaves it there and forces you to clean up, I mean, that is the antithesis of promote the general welfare.
Of course.
Getting somebody to literally pay for their own cleanup so our funds, our general funds, goes back to us rather than to someone else who should be paying for their own
mess.
Yes, thank you, because I clean up my room. Anyway, HR 4088, please consider it. If this isn't on the Green New Deal and the Just Society, I don't know what else would be.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Well, we can definitely circle back and take a look at it. As you said, it's HR 4088, so sometimes there are thousands of pieces of legislation. So if you ever see that we're not on something and you're like, why isn't she on this? Just bring it up to us. Sometimes literally there's just so many. So we're most responsive to our constituents. So thank you for bringing it up. We'll make sure that we'll circle back on it.
Sponsor and introduced it July 26, 2019. I want to give him the credit too.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, no, Mr. Blumenauer, Congressman Blumenauer is great. If you ever meet him, he'll give you a little bicycle pin because he's very passionate about that issue. Yeah, okay, great. So we'll definitely circle back and take a look at it, but I do think that I do think that you also get at a very critical issue, which is that the companies and the corporations that are responsible for most of our environmental problems also need to be held accountable and be part of the solution to our environmental problems. Because this happens over and over again, whether it was Deepwater Horizon, that was, remember, like 10 years ago, it dumped all of that oil into the Gulf of Mexico. You know, the public paid for a lot of that. And it's not, and this happens over and over again, where they make a mess and the public cleans it up. And they make a mess and we get cancer. And it all kind of dumps into our public systems. And when it comes to climate change, ExxonMobil knew. ExxonMobil knew before even the federal government knew that burning fossil fuels were going to create this issue. And they put money into deceiving the public and legislators about this issue. And now, in one generation, the majority of our carbon emissions that are imperiling our planet right now have come since the first episode of Seinfeld. So, and almost about 85% of our carbon emissions have all happened since World War II. So we got here in about 1 to 2 generations, and now we've got 1 generation to bring us back from the brink. And it's going to take a real big reckoning with power and the fossil fuel industry. Because if you think Wall Street is powerful, it is like Wall Street, much of Wall Street is predicated on the profits and funding of fossil fuels, oil, natural gas, all gas, etc. And when people want to talk about the role of money in politics, who here's heard of the Koch brothers? Or now Koch brother, right? Everyone's heard of the Koch brother. Brother. Right, there's one now, just Koch. And here's the thing, everybody knows those guys, right? They're notorious for basically owning every Republican in the United States Senate. But where'd they get their money? They're an oil dynasty. And so, yeah, I mean, and so can we have to step back and acknowledge how bad inequality has become in America today, that we can name specific families that own our democracy right now. If you're like, who has power in America? The Mercers, the Waltons, the Koch brothers. It's like the fact that you can name individuals that run our society tells us everything about America and our economy, and you can call it late-stage capitalism, you can call it plutocracy, I don't care what you call it, that is the state of our economy today. And like, that's all of it in a nutshell. The fact that we can say which family owns the Senate and which family owns certain areas of public policy tells us that there is something wrong in our democracy. And so, they're the ones that dump the money into Fox News. They're the ones that dump the money. I mean, literally, there is a guy that owns the New York Post, that owns, like, that an individual owns that, which shouldn't be a surprise when the New York Post, and sorry, no offense if there's any of those folks in here, but journalists are great. But when we talk about these institutions and the money and the direction and the framing, who they attack are the people who are attacking and challenging their hold on power. And so, particularly when Fox News becomes like the 24/7 squad network, that tells me we're doing a good job. Because if we're making the right people mad. And that to me, you know, and for that, I also just want to say that how appreciative I am of our community for understanding that, for seeing through it, for knowing, you know, where to call BS, and that recognize that truth. Because if our community didn't recognize it, if our community was easily duped, then I wouldn't be able to have a seat in Congress. And so I just want to extend that appreciation to you all as well. So thank you.
The next question is for Saad S. Okay. And then Carlos Morales. Okay.
I'm afraid I won't be called on, and I really think we have to take up this impeachment question. I totally oppose it. I read the entire transcript of this conversation that Trump had with Zelensky. There was no quid pro quo, but Joe Biden did do that and bragged about withholding $1 billion from Ukraine if they didn't fire the prosecutor in this case. There seems to be a gap. I concur with the president that there is a coup ongoing, and it's directed, and it comes from London. The British House of Lords said that the special relationship between the U.S. and Britain would not survive a second term of Trump. Pelosi didn't support impeachment until she met with Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, and I don't know what he threatened her with. So I think I'll stop when my 2 minutes are up. But this is a serious matter.
No, it's okay. We can defuse. So we'll defuse. One thing that I just want to say is, like, I just want to make sure that we respect process, because very often when we disrespect process, the people who are disrespected by that process are the people who are always marginalized. And so I just want to name that. I don't want to silence your concern. I am not here to say we're only going to listen to people we agree with. So I want to name that. I'm going to take this question, and I'm going to come back, and I'm going to respond to what you have to say, okay?
Always a lady, Alex. Always
Thank you. Thank you. Please.
First of all, I want to thank you so much, and I know I only have 2 minutes to ask my question, but just real quick, I don't know if you remember this, but when you were in the gay parade in Jackson Heights, I told you that you were going to be on Stephen Colbert, and you laughed at me. So I just want to point that out to you.
I did.
Nobody knew who you were, and I'm so glad that that happened. Now, a more lighthearted question among impeachment and all that stuff, but I do want to ask because I do work retail, I do work at Best Buy, and I'm very passionate about technology. And I think that if the Green New Deal is very important to you, then I think that innovation in technology should be too. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to ask, since net neutrality is something that's very important to me, and back before you were our representative, Ajit Pai was trying to dismantle it, and Trump was for it. And one of the only companies, well, the only two companies which are actually trying to merge right now, stood against that, and it was T-Mobile and Sprint, and they said that they were going to guarantee net neutrality, and I think that is very important that there isn't a monopoly on our free speech, because that's what our, what it's evolved to, what our society has evolved to. So I wanted to ask, why is Rashida Tlaib, why are you, and why is the squad against the merger, even though they're one of the biggest innovators in net neutrality? And I also want to point out that I have one more question after this one as well.
Sure, of course. So thank you for asking this question. This is a really good question. I commend any company that stands up for net neutrality. So in the T-Mobile Sprint merger, T-Mobile did the right thing by opposing, or not opposing net neutrality, by being for net neutrality. Sprint did the right thing in doing that. So this is not about opposing the merger or even approving a merger as rewarding good behavior per se. So let me tell you why. This merger is an antitrust problem. And when we hear kind of in 2008, like too big to fail, we need to have, so telecommunications is an area where there's something known as natural monopolies. And what happens is, like, remember back in the day, like in the 90s, you had like Bell and like all these companies and stuff. And sometimes these companies, now I'm like throwing back, people are like, oh, Bell, okay. This is an area where there's always kind of this push and pull with antitrust, because it will naturally move towards larger and larger networks. And one of the big problems that we have in our society is the concentration of wealth and the concentration of power among corporations. So I would prefer, so for example, in the case of net neutrality, you allow both of these folks to merge. Now, all of a sudden, you only have one company that is supporting net neutrality, whereas net neutrality can be one area of competition between members of this area. So I oppose the merger on antitrust grounds. I am concerned about corporations merging too much. You know, we see this with like Viacom, Comcast, like all of these things. And so it's funny because a lot of people are like, they'll say, oh my God, she's a democratic socialist. We believe in the free market, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, they want corporations to become our government and like consolidate in huge, massive entities. So I oppose the merger based on antitrust grounds, because we need to have separate actors in this market. But you bring up excellent points, and I do want to reiterate a commitment to net neutrality. And even in our measurement of the poverty line, we talk about internet as a new necessity. And there has been a lot of damage that Ajit Pai has done, because he was a former Verizon lobbyist. So they're putting like wolves in charge of the hen house in every part of government, and he's the wolf in charge of our telecommunications hen house. But we disagree with it on grounds of antitrust and on corporate power, but it's not because we disagree with net neutrality.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course.
I also have one more question, and it's on a little bit of a more serious note. So I am a Palestinian American, and I'm very proud of that, and I will never apologize for that, and it has been very hard for me to not apologize for that for the past couple of years. So this very important question doesn't have to do with Palestine directly, but not directly. But I do see on Twitter and on the news a lot of things going on with Uyghur Muslims in China. I do not know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I do feel like, you know, if we are going to so blatantly say that, you know, we stand by the Jewish community and we're never going to let the Holocaust happen, or we stand with, you know, the Japanese community and or the Asian community and we're never going to let internment camps happen in World War II, why are we not doing the same thing for Muslims? And why is it that I always see like Al Jazeera or like Muslim news sources bringing this up when this is obviously a global issue? Because if one religion is attacked right now, that means that everybody is going to be attacked in the future.
Absolutely. No, thank you for bringing visibility to that. You're 100% right. I believe, Ariel, we've authored letters on Uyghur. Have we joined? So we've joined letters talking about this issue of Uyghur Muslims, but what you're talking about is exactly correct in that we need to amplify visibility around this issue. We've been doing work, we've been joining letters, filing congressional inquiries on this, but it's a huge issue. And detention, it's no secret how I feel about it. Detention.
I literally saw today while I was on the train that their organs are being taken out and sold on the black market.
Yeah,
and that's disgusting.
Yes, no, and the reports that are coming out of these camps are shocking. So I think you're absolutely right. This is an issue that we need to draw a lot more attention to, because it is truly horrifying. It is truly horrifying. And so we're doing the work on the congressional side, but I think a big part of that push, you're right, is a commitment to amplifying that. And I'm happy to join you and figure out how we can put more shine on this issue so that more people pay attention.
Thank you so much.
No,
I really appreciate that.
Oh, and I did say I was going to address right over here, right after that question. What I would say, and what I would encourage people to do, is to, you know, you and I clearly have different takes on this issue. So I'm going to name that. I'm not going to try to tell you you're wrong or anything like that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to invite everyone to actually read the transcript and come to your conclusion. To me, when someone says, I need you to do me a favor though, and then that favor is to investigate a political opponent, and then you connect that person to your personal attorney and the domestic attorney general, we're not talking about a foreign secretary, that to me is a crime. And again, we may disagree, and that's totally fine, but that's why I invite our constituents, read it yourself. Come to your own conclusion. But I've heard from our community.
A bunch of Nazis in power in Ukraine. The United States under Obama ran a coup in Ukraine where people waving swastikas.
Again, and I'd say I'd invite everyone to do the research.
And that's a crime that should be investigated.
And I'd say I'd invite everyone to and again, I'd invite everyone to look into it, etc. We can all come to our conclusions. As the Congresswoman for this district, I have heard loud and clear from the majority of our constituents where we stand on this issue, and my job is to follow that in good and full faith.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, thank you for being here.
Of course, no, thank you for coming.
For the first time in my life, a politician like yourself has called my attention.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to exercise my vote, and I will exercise my vote, and I'll be participating eventually to vote on behalf of someone like yourself. I hope that someday you will be a leader of this country, because you're protecting our
I get into too much trouble for that.
You're protecting our families, you're protecting our community, you're a voice for us. I'm a banker by trade, and I do mortgage financing analysis. And yet it's almost impossible for anyone to qualify for a loan. There is no saving ability. The cost of medication is so high. How come whenever they're doing questions to vote for president, how come no one addressed why do we have to wait 20 and 40 years to lower the cost of medication when other countries is 80% cheaper?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, because I think you're completely right. It is just such a condemnation of our system that it is controversial to believe that all people should be entitled to the right to health care, should be entitled to health care in the United States. I mean, the fact that that's controversial to me, it's actually pretty heartbreaking, because I grew up in a very, I'd say, patriotic family. You know, I'm first generation, I don't know, depending on I'm Puerto Rican, so it's complicated. But I grew up, and my parents always, you know, talked to me about the American dream. They always talked to me about how incredible and blessed we are to live in the United States of America, and we are. But that's why it breaks my heart that we're always talking about what we're not capable of. And meanwhile, everybody else is doing it. Canada guarantees its people health care. The UK has the National Health Service. I mean, all of these countries that are developed know that in order to be an advanced society, you need to guarantee people health care. And we have not earned the right to call ourselves an advanced country if we don't do that. And so it shouldn't be controversial to say that we need to do things that we've never done before, because that's what growth means.
It is now that we need to do it, not 20
Yes.
years from now.
Yes,
It's very
exactly.
important. That's why we need you. We need to build more inventory of housing. So many people want to buy. Some people want to working hard, and they don't have the saving ability because the medication is too cost, that is too expensive. So we need someone like yourself to put a voice in Congress and be able to have what everybody's looking for, the dream of this great country.
I appreciate that. And
Thank
it's
you for being
also-
here. Thank
No,
you so much.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah. And it's also why it's not just on us, right? It's not just on me. It's not just on a few people. We need to elect a lot more people in being committed to this, because I, for one, am tired of us operating in a political system where people do things out of fear. Either they do things because they're scared of what they're going to lose, or they do things because they're scared of what people are going to say about them. And we need to operate more out of our convictions and our vision, because if we are always operating from a place of fear. If I do this, am I going to lose re-election? If I do this, am I going to be less powerful now than we were before? And we have to stop operating out of fear, and we have to stop operating out of elections, and we need to start operating out of principle. That's not really what politics does, but but it's something that we can encourage as an electorate, as voters, as people who demand accountability in our system.
Great. So these are the last two questions. After this, the Congresswoman is going to present some closing remarks. And then if you're interested in greeting the Congresswoman, maybe taking a picture of her, at the end, please line up in the middle, and we'll create a line so you can do so. So the last two questions come from Lurline Grant and Nicole Maxley. May you raise your hands, please? Okay. Great.
But we're not going to be here for much long because of the climate crisis. We only have a few months left. I love that you support the Green Deal, but it's not getting rid of fossil fuel. It's not going to solve the problem fast enough. A Swedish professor saying, we can eat dead people, but that's not fast enough. So I think your next campaign slogan has to be this: we got to start eating babies. We don't have enough time. There's too much CO2. All of you're a pollutant. Too much CO2. We have to start now, please. You are so great. I'm so happy that you're really supporting the Green Deal, but it's not enough. Even if we would bomb Russia, we still have too many people, too much pollution. So we have to get rid of the babies. That's a big problem. Just stopping having babies is not enough. We need to eat the babies, and this is very serious. Please give a response.
Thank you. No, thank you, thank you. We'll go ahead.
Okay.
No, we'll go ahead. No. Yeah, no. Thank you. So I think so one of the things that's very important to us is that we need to treat the climate crisis with the urgency that it does present. Luckily, we have more than a few months. We do need to hit net zero in several years. But I think we all need to understand that there are a lot of solutions that we have and that we can pursue, and that if we act in a positive way, there's space for hope. We are never beyond hope. Okay. We'll start right there.
Congresswoman AOC, thank you so much for, again, your message of hope for all the work that you do and what you stand for in the government right now. I myself am a granddaughter of someone who passed away from Alzheimer's, so thank you for your question. She had Alzheimer's for 10 years. Fortunately, we were able to get the money to take care of her and her needs. Also, my cousin is in federal prison, and I want to thank you for the Just Society bill that you just represented. My question to you, for all of us young millennials out there in our 20s and 30s, and just starting out from college, what can we do, not just on social media, which we can see a change from that. I mean, look at your platform and look what you have accomplished from that. But what can we do in actions outside of social media that can help you? Because we know it's a lot of work that you're doing in all areas of government and all the things that we brought up today in this town hall meeting. But what can we do to help you and your platform to thrive and really help change this government?
Of course, no, thank you so much. It's a really great question. One of the things that I think is best to do is that, it's not just about helping me, because I am just part of a larger grassroots movement. I'm here because a critical mass of people have demanded justice in our criminal justice system, in environmental justice, in education, decarceration, et cetera. And so I think one of the best things that you can do is find that issue that has touched your life, that you are most passionate about. And you don't have to often read for it. Usually your life experience informs what that should be for you. I started this whole thing because the issue that touched my life was early childhood education. Because when I was a kid, I was born in the Bronx, and my parents felt like they had to pack up our whole lives and move to another zip code just so that I could have a chance. And so I grew up and I moved back to the Bronx because I didn't want the next generation to have to make the choice that my parents made, because I don't believe that a child's destiny should be determined by their zip code. And so education and early childhood education became a passion of mine. That's where I mobilized in. And eventually that's kind of like through a series of accidents, circumstance, coincidence, whatever is what brought me here. So I think that one of the best things you can do is dive into the areas that directly impact your life. So if you are being directly impacted in a really urgent way by housing, join a housing organization, join your tenants organization, work with the Justice for All Coalition, or et cetera. The best thing you can do is start to organize back here in our own backyard, and that builds all the way up. And then, and I would hope around election time, I would have the privilege and the honor of asking you for your support, because I believe that I have to fight for it every time. And so the best thing that you can do is lean in to work around Alzheimer's, as our neighbor did right here. Lean into work on incarceration, because that seems to have touched your life. Lean into work around housing, around the environment. We don't all have to be the masters of everything. Sometimes the best path there is to really lean into the things that have touched our lives. For me, it was early childhood education. For you, it may be something else. But the best thing you can do right now to help this movement is to be a really amazing organizer of people. Of course, thank you.
Alzheimer's Society, and I want to give you.
Of course, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. All right, thank you. Hi.
Hi, I'm so glad to meet you.
Can you hold the mic really close? They're not very sensitive.
Okay, because you, from the time you were elected, I am from Sherwood Village. I'm the president of the, and I wonder, I said, I see you on TV, but never hear you anywhere in the neighborhood. So thank you for coming, and I'm glad to be here. And I listened to all these. My sister died in England from dementia. In my church, we have an outreach program for people incarcerated. It's called Angel Tree. So I head up the community that give gifts to the people who incarcerated their children, and Christmas time, we give them presents. We get presents for the kids. And so, everything here is, to my heart. But my question is the community in the building that I live in. We have such a hard time. Everything is monopolized in that place, including the how we get our internet. It's all one spectrum. It was Verizon, and then Verizon can come in, only Spectrum. And I am a retired senior citizen. I am paying $147 a month. So I don't know what, is there anything that anybody can do? Because I had a meeting with the manager today, and he's telling me, oh, it's the same with all around. I don't think so, because my friend in Springfield Garden, she's only paying $80 a month because she have a house and she have a choice. Why do I have to pay $147 a month?
No, thank you. No, thank you. And you bring up an excellent question. First of all, I do have to say that we've been in the community a lot. But no, but I don't say that to negate your experience. But that being said, there's almost 1 million people in our district. We're out and about, but I'm bound to miss somebody. So I'm really glad that I'm having this face-to-face with you right now, and I hope to have a lot more in the future. What I will say, this is one of the reasons why we oppose the T-Mobile Sprint merger. Because of this outcome that you're experiencing right now, we have just a handful of these kinds of cable providers or telecommunications providers in our backyard, right? Depending on where you are, you have maybe 2. In my neck of the woods in Parkchester, it is Verizon or what's Cablevision now? Optimum. So it's Verizon and Optimum. In some places, it's Spectrum, or Spectrum, Comcast. You see what I'm saying? All of these are all stacked up against each other or on top of each other. And one of the reasons why sometimes, arguably, these services are so expensive is because there's a lack of competition in the area. There's natural monopolies. We have to check in your individual scenario to see if there's something that you could qualify for that could help us bring your costs down. But it's a similar thing that some of these services are far, far, far too expensive, particularly for vulnerable populations. So we'll have to check on your specific situation, figure out what building it is that you live in, what neighborhood, et cetera, to see if there's something that we can do for you. But I mean, it's really, really expensive. And this is part of the cost of living that is pricing out our entire community. And this is part of a much larger story that's of New York City. When people are talking about, if anybody grew up here, they know that the whole city has transformed. And in some ways for better, but in other ways, we're getting completely priced out. And my opinion is that displacement is not a form of community development. And a lot of times what we do is that we say that we're improving the community, we're investing in the community, and all that we're doing is that we're taking everyone in the community, we're booting them out, and then we're importing people that are already making more money, that can already just afford a higher quality of living. And then we're acting as though we improved everyone's income. And that's like not how I'm interested in doing this. And so, you know, and like when people talk about Amazon, they like want to continue making this a controversy. I'll be very clear. I'm not sorry about the stance that we took because people are talking about, first of all, jobs. Where did that number come from? Where did that 25,000 jobs number come from? You'll find out it came from Amazon. And that, first of all, were those jobs for us? And also, we have a little bit of a natural experiment here because they were trying to put HQ2, right? So where did HQ1 go? The other one went, ironically, right in the backyard of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. And what we found is that they didn't build it here. They did build it there. They're moving forward with building it there. They're not even done with it, and rents have already gone up almost 20%. Or rather, costs and sales and things like that. Like, it's skyrocketing. And so our community, like, this is a displacement strategy and a displacement approach to quote-unquote development. And so my approach is that we don't invest in buildings. It's not just about investing in buildings. We need to invest in people. And if we're not investing in the people, what is the point in investing in the buildings if we can't afford to live in them? And so, like, that's that on that. I think that was our last question. So we're gonna wrap up as Michelle and Noreen talked about. So we'll, doing that line here and.
Make it easier because I see we have a lot of elders here and we're really happy that you're all here. We're gonna go row by row. So we'll go
Okay.
row one, row two, so that way we don't have to move. So you can just
Okay,
get seated.
great.
And so we'll start on this
I'll sit right over here. Oh, awesome. So thank you all again so very much for coming. We really appreciate it.
There you go. Here you go, so glad you always come to our district.
Yeah.
You'll see that all the time, right?
Thank you.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you so much.
Now, sit.
I need to take one with me too, yeah? All right, that's the last one and we gotta move it. Okay. So hold the line, nobody can come in. All right, everybody better sit down. You better sit down so I can be calling you. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Perfect, done. All right. Okay, that's my day. Now, just let me you gotta sit down in your row. I said, in your row, please go in your row. That's my all right. Nobody's coming in. Everybody sit it down. Yes.
Jobs, affordable housing, daycare centers, affordable housing, state
I'm glad you got a chance to meet us. Yes, it does. All right.
Everyone, please sit down,
All right,
and we will organize the row flags.
Hi, everyone. Mic check, mic check. Hello. All right, so I think a process for pictures that makes the most sense is if everyone just sits down, and then what I'm gonna do is kind of like a church usher, come in, and we'll form from here. Does that make sense to everyone? So if you are waiting for a photo, just take a seat. I'm gonna play church usher, and we'll have everyone make sure they get their picture. Yeah? Yeah? All right, cool. So first step is everyone sitting down. Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say one thing.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. Okay. All right, so this, is everyone seated? Are we, all right, you tell me when we're ready.
All right. So I see this was the first one. Yes, darling. So we're gonna go with this. I'm gonna go one by one.
Okay, I was in that phone.
Want a picture of the one?
I'm gonna. My sister got me. That's my friend.
Okay, we just gotta follow process. How are you, sweetheart? I'm happy. Here you go. Here you go.
And thank you for the traffic.
All right. Here we go. Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Hold on. Let's try it again. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes. I'm going to get in touch with the office so we can have a conversation. Thank you.
All right. You want to take a picture? Okay, here we go. All right. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Perfect. All right.
Give me that picture.
Wait, 1 second.
1 second. 1 second. Come on, things. All right, I got it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Wait, Diana.
Thank you so much. Of course, we definitely will.
Hi, how are you? Get this. Great turnout. I got my phone. Can somebody do this for me? I'll do it.
Ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, and now we're going to do the other phone. Right here.
Get it.
Sheldon, you have comment? We'll get it. No stress. Right here. All right.
I'm so sorry.
Ready? 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you for coming. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
So we're going to go to the other side. Okay. What is your word?
Get a picture. Let me get a picture, y'all. Yeah, I take selfies for her, though. Okay. One more. Okay, here, because I got to use some guy.
All right, thank you so much. Diane? Thank you so much. Yes. All right. We're going to go on this side.
Would you like me to take a picture of you, ma'am?
No, we always do selfies.
Only do selfies?
Listen, I love you. Change your
I have to see what you have about. Thank you for coming, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you have the right one.
No, I don't. Go ahead. What is it? So you have mine.